The champagne cork popped with a sound like a gunshot, echoing through the private VIP room of Manhattan's most exclusive club. Jason Sterling held his glass high, laughing as he told his friends, "She gets nothing. No alimony, no house, just her old life back." He thought he had committed the perfect crime, divorcing the quiet, submissive school teacher he'd grown bored of while keeping his millions intact. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. But Jason forgot one thing. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes silence is just a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment was about to arrive in the form of a man Jason had only met once, a man whose true power was about to turn Jason's victory into a living nightmare. The ice in the crystal tumbler clinked softly, a sound that, to Jason Sterling, sounded like pure victory. He swirled the amber liquid, a 30-year-old single malt scotch that cost more per glass than his ex-wife used to make in a week, and leaned back into the plush leather booth. "To freedom," Jason announced, raising the glass. Across from him, his two best friends and business partners, Brad and Lewis, raised their own glasses. They were the kind of men who wore their wealth like armor, Italian suits, watches that cost as much as mid-sized sedans, and smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "To the single life," Brad grinned, clinking his glass against Jason's, "and to Marcus Thorne, the greatest divorce attorney in the state of New York." "Amen to that," Jason laughed, taking a long, satisfied sip. The burn of the alcohol felt good. It felt like validation. Thorne is a shark. He didn't just win. He eviscerated her legal team. I walked away with the portfolio, the Hamptons property, and the penthouse. Elena got the 2018 Honda Civic and her personal effects. Lewis, always the more cautious of the group, raised an eyebrow. "She really didn't fight for the stock options? Sterling Tech is up 12% this quarter. That's a lot of equity to walk away from." "She tried," Jason scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Her lawyer, some distinctively unimpressive guy named Mr. Finch, tried to argue that she supported me while I built the company, which sure, she paid the rent for 2 years while I coded in the living room, but does that entitle her to half my empire? I don't think so. Thorne buried them in paperwork. We found a loophole in the prenup regarding intellectual property creation prior to marriage. It was brilliant. She was so overwhelmed, she just wanted it to end." Jason looked out the window at the glittering New York skyline. He felt invincible. At 34, he was the CEO of a logistics software company valued at nearly $50 million. He was handsome, fit, and now legally unburdened by a wife he considered dead weight. Elena Vance. That was her name again. Not Elena Sterling, just Vance. When they met 6 years ago, she was charming in a quaint way, a kindergarten teacher with soft eyes and a quiet demeanor. She was the perfect accessory for a struggling entrepreneur, low maintenance, supportive, never asking for much. But as Jason ascended, Elena stayed the same. She didn't like the galas. She didn't know how to network with venture capitalists. She preferred reading paperback novels to discussing market trends. She became, in Jason's eyes, an embarrassment. She was crying in the mediation room, Jason recounted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, actually shaking. Finch, her lawyer, looked like he was asleep half the time. At the end, she just whispered, "I just want to go home, Jason." So I let her go. I'm a benevolent king. "You're a savage," Brad laughed, signaling the waiter for another round. "So what's the plan? You're a free agent in NYC. The world is your oyster." "First," Jason said, adjusting his cufflinks, "I'm buying that Porsche GT3 I've had my eye on. Then, I'm expanding the business. We're looking at a merger with Oakhaven Logistics in Q1. Once that goes through, my net worth triples. Elena will be grading coloring books in Queens while I'm ringing the bell at the NYSE. The night wore on, a blur of expensive liquor and ego-stroking conversation. Around 1 a.m., the group decided to stumble out into the cool autumn air. The street was busy, filled with the usual chaos of the city. Jason was waiting for his Uber Black, checking his phone, when he saw something that made him pause. Across the street, exiting a small, nondescript jazz bar, was Eleanor. She looked different. During the divorce proceedings over the last 6 months, she had looked pale, tired, and dressed in frumpy cardigans. Tonight, she was wearing a long, tailored black trench coat that looked deceptively simple, but hung with the precision of high fashion. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was loose and cascading down her shoulders in polished waves. "Well, look at that," Brad nudged Jason. "The ex-wife. She looks decent. She's probably celebrating her freedom with a cheap glass of Pinot," Jason sneered, though a flicker of unease pricked at his stomach. She didn't look devastated. She looked calm. Then the car pulled up. It wasn't a Honda Civic. It wasn't an Uber. A sleek, midnight blue Bentley Mulsanne glided to the curb in front of Eleanor. The rear door didn't just open. A uniformed driver stepped out with military precision, opened the door, and bowed his head slightly as Eleanor approached. Before she got in, she paused. Almost as if she felt eyes on her. She looked across the street, her eyes locked with Jason's. He expected to see sadness. He expected to see longing or anger. Instead, he saw absolutely nothing. Her face was a mask of total indifference. She looked at him the way one might look at a fire hydrant or a discarded wrapper on the sidewalk. Then, a small, faint smile touched her lips. Not a happy smile, but a knowing one. She slipped into the Bentley. The door closed with a solid thud that echoed across the street. The car merged seamlessly into traffic and disappeared. "Whoa," Lewis muttered. "Since when does a kindergarten teacher get picked up in a $500,000 car?" Jason frowned, the buzz of the scotch suddenly turning sour in his stomach. She must have started dating someone already. Probably some old guy with money. It's the only way she'd get near a car like that. "Yeah," Brad agreed, though he sounded unconvinced. "Moving on fast. That's cold." "Let her," Jason spat, turning away. "She's someone else's problem now. Whoever he is, he can pay for her dinner. I'm done." But as Jason rode home to his empty, expensive penthouse, the image of that Bentley stuck in his mind. And more importantly, the look on her face. It wasn't the face of a woman who had just lost everything. It was the face of a woman who knew something he didn't. The hangover from the divorce party had long faded, replaced by the adrenaline of business. Jason Sterling walked through the glass-walled corridors of his company like a god surveying his temple. Sterling Tech was his creation, his baby. The software they built optimized shipping routes for mid-sized trucking companies. It wasn't sexy, but it was incredibly lucrative. He walked into the conference room for the weekly status meeting. His CFO, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, was already there, looking pale. "Morning, Sarah," Jason said breezily, throwing his jacket over a chair. "Great day for capitalism. Let's talk about the Oakhaven merger. I want to finalize the term sheet by Friday." Sarah didn't open her laptop. She just stared at him. "Jason, we have a problem. We always have problems. That's why we exist. Is it a server outage?" "No," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's the bank. I tried to authorize the payroll transfer this morning. It was declined." Jason laughed. "Declined? Don't be ridiculous. There's $3 million in operating cash in the primary account. It's a glitch. Call our rep at Chase." "I did," Sarah said. They said the account has been frozen pending a compliance review. Compliance? We're a software company, not a drug cartel. What kind of review? They wouldn't say. But Jason, it's not just the operating account. The line of credit we use for overhead. That's been pulled too. We're running on fumes. Jason felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his back. Get me the bank on the phone. Now. For the next 3 hours, Jason Sterling yelled at junior bank executives, was put on hold, and was transferred between departments. Finally, he got a vice president on the line, a man he had played golf with twice. Look, Jason, the VP said, his voice hushed. I shouldn't even be telling you this. This didn't come from us. This order came from above, way above. What does that mean? The Fed? No. It's a private flagged action. Someone invoked a breach of contract clause regarding your initial seed funding. The debt has been called in. Immediately. Jason froze. Seed funding? That was 6 years ago. I paid that loan off. Did you? The VP asked. Or did you just service the interest? Look at your original contract, Jason, the one you signed when you started the company in your living room. Jason slammed the phone down. He scrambled to his office safe, spinning the dial with shaking fingers. He pulled out the dusty leather binder containing the incorporation papers of Sterling Tech. He remembered those days. He had been broke. He had an idea, but no capital. Elena had said her father could help. Jason had rolled his eyes. Elena's father, Arthur, was some retired guy living in Maine who barely spoke. But Arthur had wired the money. $200,000. Jason had treated it like a gift from a senile old man. He scanned the document, his eyes darting frantically. There it was. Clause 14b. The lender, Vance Holdings, LLC, reserves the right to call the full principal plus 40% equity penalty if the borrower, Jason Sterling, engages in conduct deemed detrimental to the moral standing of the Vance family. Jason stared at the paper. Vance Holdings, LLC. He had always assumed that was just a shell company Arthur used to manage his retirement savings. Moral standing, Jason whispered. This is a joke. This is unenforceable. He dialed his shark lawyer, Marcus Thorne. Marcus, I've got a situation. My ex-wife's father is trying to pull a fast one with an old loan. He's frozen my business accounts. Marcus Thorne, usually smooth and reassuring, was silent for a long moment. Who is your ex-wife's father, Jason? Marcus asked slowly. Arthur Vance. He's a nobody. He lives in a cabin in Maine. There was the sound of typing on the other end of the line. Then Marcus stopped typing. The silence that followed was heavy, terrifying. Jason, Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. You need to listen to me very carefully. Did you say Arthur Vance? Yes, why? Jason, Arthur Vance isn't a nobody. Arthur Vance is the former majority shareholder of United Global Logistics. He's the man who broke the dockworkers' strike of '98 by buying the shipping lines. He's been retired for 15 years, but he sits on the board of 3 of the 5 biggest banks in the world. Jason felt the blood drain from his face. What? No. Elena. Elena drove a Honda. She clipped coupons. Because she chose to, Marcus snapped. You idiot. You didn't marry a teacher. You married the heiress to an industrial empire that makes your little software company look like a lemonade stand. Fix it, Marcus. Sue him. Sue him? Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Jason, I'm looking at the docket right now. A motion was just filed 5 minutes ago. Vance Holdings is filing for an injunction to seize Sterling Tech's IP as collateral for the unpaid debt, and the judge assigned to it. It's Judge Hallowell. Do you know who Hallowell's godfather is? Jason couldn't speak. It's Arthur Vance, Marcus answered for him. You didn't just win a divorce, Jason. You declared war on a sleeping dragon, and I can't represent you." "What?" Jason screamed. "I paid you 100 grand. "I'll refund it. I'm not going up against Arthur Vance. My firm does business with his banks. If I fight him, I'm out of business by Monday. You're on your own, Jason. Good luck." The line went dead. Jason sat in his ergonomically designed chair, the silence of his office pressing in on him. He looked out at the city he thought he owned. His phone buzzed. A text message. An unknown number. "Mr. Sterling. Mr. Vance requests your presence for tea. 3 or contorto por p.m. The St. Regis Hotel. Do not be late." Jason looked at the clock. It was 2:15 p.m. Panic, hot and jagged, ripped through his chest. He grabbed his jacket. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing. The Honda Civic, the coupons, the silence. It had all been a test, and he had failed spectacularly. The St. Regis smelled of old leather, fresh orchids, and a level of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Jason Sterling walked into the Astor suite, feeling like an imposter in his own life. He was wearing a $5,000 bespoke suit, but sweat was trickling down his back, staining the expensive Egyptian cotton shirt. Sitting by the window, overlooking Fifth Avenue, was an old man. Arthur Vance did not look like a titan of industry. He looked like a grandfather who spent his days whittling on a porch. He wore a tweed jacket with leather patches at the elbows and held a cane made of dark, polished walnut. But when he turned to look at Jason, the illusion of frailty vanished. His eyes were the color of steel and just as hard. "Mr. Sterling," Arthur said. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer a hand. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Earl Grey. I took the liberty of pouring you a cup." Jason sat, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Mr. Vance, I didn't know you were in the city. Elena never mentioned you traveled much." "Elena didn't mention a lot of things," Arthur said softly, picking up his teacup with a hand that didn't shake in the slightest. "That was the point." "Look, Arthur." "Can I call you Arthur?" Jason started, trying to summon his CEO bravado. "There's been a misunderstanding. My accounts have been frozen. My business is hemorrhaging because of some clerical error regarding a loan from years ago. I'm sure we can sort this out like gentlemen." Arthur took a slow sip of tea, placing the cup back on the saucer with a delicate clink. "There is no error, Jason, and I am not a gentleman. I am a businessman. A gentleman would challenge you to a duel for how you treated his daughter. A businessman simply liquidates the liability." Jason bristled. "Liability? I built that company. I worked 18-hour days." "With whose money?" Arthur asked. "Do you remember the day you asked Elena for the funds? You were desperate. No bank would touch you. You had a credit score of 580 and a dream. Elena came to me. She begged. She said, 'Daddy, he's brilliant. He just needs a chance.'" Arthur leaned forward, the cane thumping softly against the carpet. "I told her you were a narcissist. I told her you loved the reflection in the mirror more than you would ever love her. But she insisted. She wanted to prove me wrong. She wanted to prove that if she supported you, if she loved you through the poverty, you would build a life with her. Not over her." Jason swallowed hard. I did build a life, but we grew apart. People change." "You didn't change, Jason. You revealed yourself," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You mocked her frugality. You didn't know that the cheap Honda she drove was a test. You didn't know that the boring books she read were financial reports for companies I own. You thought she was simple. She was simply watching." "Okay," Jason said, holding up his hands. "Fine. I was a bad husband. Is that what this is?" Revenge? You want more money? I'll write you a check right now for the seed money. With interest. Double the interest, Arthur chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. Money? Jason, look around you. I don't need your money. I have a GDP larger than some European countries. This isn't about the loan. It's about the clause. The morality clause, Jason spat. It won't hold up in court. It will in my courts, Arthur said calmly. But that's just the beginning. You see, Jason, you made a critical error in your business model. Sterling Tech optimizes shipping logistics, correct? Yes. We're the best in the market. And who do you think owns the shipping containers your software tracks? Arthur asked. Who owns the ports? Who owns the trucking fleets? Jason froze. United Global Logistics, Arthur said. Vance Maritime, North Atlantic Freight, all subsidiaries of Vance Holdings. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. He placed it on the table. I made one phone call this morning, Jason. I told my logistics managers to switch software providers. By tomorrow morning, Sterling Tech will be incompatible with 80% of the North American supply chain. Jason jumped to his feet, knocking the tea table. You can't do that. That's antitrust. That's illegal. It's aggressive business, Arthur corrected, unbothered by Jason's outburst. You wanted to be a big shot, Jason. You wanted to play in the deep end. Well, welcome to the ocean. You're not a shark here. You're chum. Jason backed toward the door, his mind racing. He had one card left. One lifeline. You can try to squeeze me, Jason sneered, his fear turning into cornered rat aggression. But you're too late. I'm merging with Oakhaven Logistics on Friday. Once that deal signs, I'll have enough capital to pivot. I won't need your ships. I'll build my own network. Arthur looked at him with something that resembled pity. Oakhaven. Yes. Bill Henderson runs that, doesn't he? Good man. Loves golf. We have a deal, Jason insisted. I'm going to be rich, Arthur, and there is nothing you or your sad little daughter can do about it. Arthur didn't respond. He just picked up his tea again and looked out the window. Goodbye, Jason. Enjoy the walk down. It's much faster than the climb up. Jason stormed out of the suite, slamming the heavy oak door behind him. He needed to call Bill Henderson at Oakhaven. He needed to seal the deal today. Jason didn't sleep. He spent the night pacing his penthouse, watching the sun rise over a city that suddenly felt hostile. He checked his bank accounts every hour. Still frozen. He was living on the cash in his wallet and a maxed-out personal credit card. But the Oakhaven merger was the golden parachute. It was a $40 million buyout. He would take the money, move to Dubai or Singapore, and start over. Somewhere Arthur Vance couldn't reach him. He arrived at Oakhaven's headquarters at 9 a.m. sharp. He strode past the receptionist. I'm here to see Bill Henderson. Tell him it's urgent. The receptionist didn't smile. She didn't offer him coffee. She just pressed a button. Mr. Sterling is here. Send him in, a voice crackled over the intercom. Jason pushed open the double doors to the boardroom. He expected to see Bill Henderson, the jovial, overweight CEO he had wooed for months. Bill was there. But he wasn't sitting at the head of the table. He was sitting on the side, looking down at his hands, his face beet red. At the head of the table sat a woman. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that looked like it cost more than Jason's car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She was reading a file, a pair of designer glasses perched on her nose. She looked up. It was Eleanor. For a moment, Jason's brain refused to process the image. This wasn't the woman who clipped coupons for tuna cans. This wasn't the woman who wore mismatched socks around the house. This was a titan. She radiated an aura of command that sucked the air out of the room. "Elena!" Jason choked out. "What are you doing here?" "Sit down, Jason," she said. Her voice was cool, stripped of any emotion. It wasn't the voice of his wife. It was the voice of the chairman of the board. "Bill?" Jason turned to the Oakhaven CEO. "What is going on? We have a term sheet." "We had a term sheet," Bill muttered, unable to meet Jason's eyes. "Things have changed, Jason. Oakhaven has been acquired." "Acquired? By who?" "By Vance Capital," Elena answered, closing the file in front of her. "As of 8 a.m. this morning, I am the acting chairwoman of Oakhaven Logistics, which means effectively, I am the one deciding on your merger." Jason felt his knees give out. He slumped into a chair. "You bought the company, just to stop me." "Don't be so vain," Elena said, a faint, razor-sharp smile appearing. "Oakhaven is a solid asset. It fits perfectly into our portfolio. Stopping you is just a bonus." She slid a single piece of paper across the mahogany table. "This is the new deal, Jason." Jason looked at the paper. His eyes widened. This is a joke. $1. You're offering to buy Sterling Tech for $1? Plus the assumption of your debts, Elena clarified, which are substantial, considering the penalty clause on the seed loan has just been activated. If you don't sign, I'll let Sterling Tech go bankrupt. I'll let the banks, my banks, seize your penthouse, your car, and your personal assets to cover the corporate liability. You'll be on the street, Jason. Literally. "I have friends," Jason shouted, though his voice cracked. "Brad, Lewis, they'll back me. We'll fight you." Elena raised an eyebrow. She tapped her phone speaker. "Mr. Finch, play the recording." A voice filled the room. It was Brad's voice. "Look, I don't know what Jason is into, but I want no part of it. If Vance Holdings is blacklisting him, I'm out. I'm pulling my investment. Just tell Mr. Vance I'm loyal to the winning side." Then Lewis's voice. "Jason who? I was just a minority partner. I'll testify against him if I have to. Just don't touch my portfolio." The recording clicked off. "Your friends were the first to call us," Elena said softly. "As soon as word got out that my father was involved, they scrambled to save themselves. You are alone, Jason." Jason stared at the paper. $1. 6 years of his life, his ego, his future, all reduced to a single crumpled dollar bill. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me who you were? We could have ruled the world together." Elena stood up. She walked over to him, leaning down so her face was inches from his. He could smell her perfume, something expensive and rare. Nothing like the vanilla body spray she used to wear to please him. "Because I didn't want a business partner, Jason. I wanted a husband. I wanted someone who loved me even when I was nobody. But you only love things that shine." She tapped the paper. "Sign it, Jason, or I destroy you completely." With a trembling hand, Jason Sterling took the heavy fountain pen. Tears of rage and humiliation blurred his vision as he signed his name, signing away his empire to the woman he had thrown away like trash. "Smart boy," Elena said, snatching the paper away. She turned to the door. "Security will escort you out. And Jason?" He looked up, broken. "Don't come near the Bentley on your way out. You might scratch the paint." The radiator in Jason's studio apartment hissed and clanked, leaking a small puddle of rusty water onto the linoleum floor, but it produced no heat. Jason sat on the edge of a mattress he had bought off Craigslist, staring at his laptop screen. "Thank you for your interest in the senior project manager position. While your background is impressive, we have decided to move forward with other candidates." It was the 50th rejection email this month. 3 months had passed since the hostile takeover. In that time, Jason Sterling had learned the true definition of power. Power wasn't having money. Power was the ability to turn someone's existence off like a light switch. After signing over Sterling Tech, Jason had assumed he could at least land a mid-level executive role somewhere else. He had an Ivy League degree. He had built a company from scratch. He was talented. But Arthur Vance's shadow was long. Every time Jason got close to an offer, the phone would ring at the hiring firm. A quiet conversation would happen behind closed doors. Then, the offer would be rescinded. He was radioactive. The word on the street was that hiring Jason Sterling was an insult to the Vance family, and no one in the tri-state area wanted to offend the Vances. His Porsche was gone, repossessed when he couldn't make the payments. The penthouse was sold at a loss to cover legal fees. His friends, Brad and Lewis, had blocked his number. He heard through LinkedIn that Brad had actually been promoted to VP at the new Oakhaven Vance conglomerate. The traitor was thriving on the bones of Jason's failure. Desperate, Jason had lowered his standards. He applied for consulting gigs, then junior developer roles, then, finally, IT support. Today, he had an interview for a Tier 1 help desk technician at a generic insurance firm. It paid $22 an hour. It was humiliating, but he had rent to pay. He put on his one remaining suit, the one he hadn't sold to a consignment shop, and took the subway into the city. He kept his head down, terrified someone would recognize him. The Jason Sterling, the man who fumbled the bag. He arrived at the insurance firm, sweating despite the winter chill. The hiring manager, a man named Gary, looked over Jason's resume with a frown. "It says here you were CEO of Sterling Tech," Gary said, chewing on a pen cap. "That's a pretty big step down to resetting passwords for our accounting department, isn't it?" "I'm looking for a change of pace," Jason lied, forcing a smile. "Less stress. I just want to work." Gary looked at him suspiciously. "Wait. Sterling. I saw an article about you. Something in Crane's New York business. Didn't you get sued for fraud or something?" "It wasn't fraud," Jason said quickly. "It was a contract dispute." "Right," Gary said, closing the folder. "Look, Mr. Sterling, we run background checks, and frankly, my boss told me explicitly that if your resume came across my desk, I was to shred it." Jason felt the blood drain from his face. "Your boss? Who is your boss?" "We're underwritten by Liberty Mutual," Gary shrugged. "But our parent holding company is associated with Vance Capital. Like I said, small world." Gary stood up and pointed to the door. "Please leave. I don't want any trouble." Jason walked out onto the grey, slushy sidewalk of Midtown Manhattan. He felt like he couldn't breathe. The city was a cage. Arthur Vance had effectively placed an embargo on his life. He checked his bank balance on his phone. 412. He had nowhere to go, no one to call. As he walked past a newsstand, a glossy magazine cover caught his eye. It was Vanity Fair. On the cover, looking regal in a white gown, was Eleanor. The headline read, "The Silent Empress, How Eleanor Vance Reclaimed Her Family's Legacy and Revolutionized Logistics." She looked beautiful, strong, happy. Jason bought the magazine with trembling hands, spending 10 of his last dollars. He sat on a cold park bench and flipped through the pages. The article detailed how she had taken over his software, improved the code, and integrated it into her father's shipping empire. Profits were up 40%. There was a quote from her. "I spent years observing how not to lead. I learned that true leadership isn't about the noise you make, it's about the people you uplift. I'm just grateful I learned that lesson before it was too late." Jason crumpled the page. She was talking about him. She was using his failure as her origin story. Anger, hot and irrational, flooded his veins. He wasn't going to let this end like this. He needed to talk to her. He needed to beg, scream, threaten, anything to get the boot off his neck. He pulled out his phone and searched for the event mentioned in the article. The Vance Foundation Winter Gala. Tonight. 7:08 p.m. The Plaza Hotel. It was a black tie event. Tickets were $5,000 a plate. Jason looked at his scuffed shoes and his fraying suit cuffs. He couldn't buy a ticket. But he knew the service entrance of the plaza. He used to host parties there. He wasn't going to the gala to celebrate. He was going to crash it. The grand ballroom was a sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and the heavy scent of expensive lilies. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The room was filled with the elite of New York society. Politicians, tech moguls, and old money families. Jason Sterling stood in the shadows of a heavy velvet curtain near the kitchen entrance. He had managed to slip in through the loading dock during a delivery of ice sculptures, grabbing a waiter's jacket from a rack in the hallway to cover his own worn suit. He scanned the room, his heart pounding against his ribs. He felt like a ghost, haunting his own funeral. He recognized half the people in the room. There was the VP of Chase Bank, who had frozen his accounts. There was the CEO of the tech startup he used to rival. And there, near the center of the room, was his circle. Brad and Lewis were standing near the champagne fountain, laughing loudly. They looked richer than ever. Brad had his arm around a young model. Lewis was deep in conversation with a senator. And then the crowd parted. Elena entered the room. She was breathtaking. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet that hugged her form, dripping with sapphires that matched her eyes. On her arm was not a man, but her father, Arthur Vance. The old man looked frail but triumphant, beaming as he presented his daughter to the room. The applause was polite but enthusiastic. Elena smiled, a genuine warm smile that Jason had never seen when they were married. She looked at ease in this world of sharks. She was the apex predator now. Jason felt a mixture of longing and hatred, so intense it nearly choked him. He stepped out from behind the curtain. He didn't have a plan. He just needed to be seen. He needed to remind them that he existed. He grabbed a tray of champagne flutes from a passing server's station to blend in, and began to weave through the crowd toward the center circle. He got closer. He could hear their voices. "Elena, darling," Brad was saying, his voice dripping with sycophancy. "The Q4 numbers are staggering. You've done in 3 months what Jason couldn't do in 3 years." Elena laughed softly. Jason had vision, Brad. He just lacked perspective. He focused on the software. I focused on the supply chain. It's a team effort. "Well, thank God you took the wheel," Lewis chimed in. "We were worried the ship was going down with the captain." Jason's grip on the silver tray tightened until his knuckles turned white. The traitors. He was 10 feet away, 5 feet. He stepped right up to the group. "Champagne?" Jason asked, his voice rasping. Brad turned around, a smile on his face, reaching for a glass. "Don't mind if I—" Brad stopped. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound silenced the immediate vicinity. Lewis turned, his jaw dropping. Elena turned slowly. Her expression didn't change. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look scared. She looked bored. "Hello, Jason," she said calmly. "Brad, Lewis." Jason nodded to his former friends, who were now backing away as if he had a contagious disease. "Enjoying the dividends." "Security," Brad hissed, looking around frantically. "Someone get security." "No," Elena said, raising a hand. "It's fine." She stepped forward, the crowd forming a circle around them. The music seemed to stop. The entire room was watching the disgraced ex-husband confront the reigning queen. "What are you doing here, Jason?" Elena asked. "Are you here to serve drinks, or are you here to make a scene?" "I'm here to ask you to stop," Jason said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. "You won, Elena. You took the company, you took the house, you turned my friends against me. But the blacklist? I can't get a job fixing printers, for God's sake. You're starving me out." Arthur Vance stepped forward, his cane clicking on the floor. "You starved my daughter of affection for 6 years, Mr. Sterling. Consider this a balancing of the scales." "I want a truce," Jason pleaded, ignoring the old man and locking eyes with Eleanor. "Just lift the ban. Let me get a job. I'll move to Ohio. I'll disappear. Just let me live." Eleanor looked at him, studying his face. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the fraying collar of his shirt, the desperation in his posture. "You still don't get it," Elena said softly, her voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "There is no ban, Jason. I didn't tell anyone not to hire you." Jason blinked. "What? That's a lie. Everywhere I go, they say it's because of the Vances." "They don't hire you because they are afraid of us, yes," Elena corrected, "but not because we asked them to be. They don't hire you because you showed the world who you really are. You showed them you were disloyal. You showed them you would sell out your partner for a little bit of equity. You showed them you were weak." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he, and the 50 people closest to them, could hear. "Business isn't just about math, Jason. It's about trust. And you are a man who cannot be trusted. That is why you are unemployed. Not because of my father, but because of your own character." Jason stood there, stripped bare in front of the elite of New York. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a consensus. He was a pariah because he was a bad man. "Please," Jason whispered, the fight leaving his body. "Elena, I have nothing." Elena looked at him for a long moment. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not love, but perhaps the memory of it. "I will make one call," Elena said finally. "There is a logistics hub in Nebraska, one of our smaller subsidiaries. They need a night shift dispatcher. It pays $40,000 a year. It's grueling work, but it's a job." She turned away from him, signaling that the audience was over. "Take it, Jason, or don't, but never come near me again." She turned back to her father, and the music started up again. 2 large security guards materialized at Jason's elbows. "Sir," one of them rumbled. "This way." As Jason was escorted out of the ballroom, dragged backward away from the warmth and the light, he saw Brad and Lewis laughing again, clinking fresh glasses of champagne. He saw Elena Vance, the woman he had called boring and simple, holding court like a queen. He had wanted a life of luxury. He had wanted to be a king. Now he was going to Nebraska to work the night shift in a warehouse owned by his ex-wife. The heavy doors of the plaza swung shut behind him, leaving him out in the cold, dark street. The snow began to fall, covering his cheap shoes in white. The wind in Nebraska didn't howl, it screamed. It was a high, thin, mechanical shriek that cut through the corrugated metal walls of the Omaha distribution center, rattling the single pane of plexiglass that separated Jason Sterling from the freezing void outside. It was 3:15 a.m., the graveyard shift, they called it. Jason used to think that term was just a figure of speech. Now, staring at the grayscale monitors in the dimly lit dispatch booth, he realized it was a literal description. This was where careers came to die. This was where ambition was buried under 6 feet of hard-packed prairie snow. Jason took a sip from his styrofoam cup. The coffee was lukewarm, gritty with grounds, and tasted faintly of the burnt rubber scent that permeated the entire facility. He drank it anyway. The caffeine was the only thing keeping his heart beating in a rhythm that resembled life. He looked down at his hands. They rested on a stained, particle-board desk, hovering over a keyboard that was missing the ESC key, a cruel bit of irony that wasn't lost on him. Those hands used to be manicured weekly at a salon in Tribeca. They used to sign checks for amounts that could buy this entire warehouse. Now, the knuckles were dry and cracked, bleeding slightly from the dry, recycled air of the heating vents. His cuticles were ragged. He had developed a nervous habit of picking at them when the silence of the night shift became too loud. "Dispatch, this is Unit 404. You copy?" The voice crackled through the headset, static-heavy and thick with exhaustion. Jason pressed the talk button. "I copy 404. Go ahead." "Yeah, look, I'm stuck at the way station off I-80. The scale master is giving me grief about the rear axle load. System says I'm green, he says I'm red. I need an override code, or I'm parking this rig for the night." Jason sighed, rubbing his temples. "Hold on, Unit 404. Let me check the protocol." He turned to his screen, the glow of the monitor reflected in his tired, sunken eyes. He navigated the interface with a muscle memory that was painful to endure. He didn't just know this software, he had birthed it. The Sterling Tech Logistics Suite. That's what it used to be called. Now, the logo in the top left corner of the screen mocked him in bright, cheerful blue. Vance Global, Smart Route 2.0. He typed in a command line. He knew the back-end architecture of this system better than he knew the layout of his own efficiency apartment. He knew that if he pressed Alt plus F5, he could bypass the load restriction protocol because he had written a backdoor for emergency routing 3 years ago. He hesitated. The old Jason, the CEO, would have bypassed it in a second to keep the freight moving. But the old Jason didn't answer to Rick. Rick was the shift manager. Rick was a man who wore steel-toed boots, chewed wintergreen tobacco, and had a framed photo of a hunting dog on his desk, but no photos of any humans. Rick had told Jason on day one, "You stick to the manual, college boy. You think you're smart? Smart gets people fired. Obedient gets people paid." "Unit 404, Jason said, his voice flat. "I can't issue an override. The system locks me out. You'll have to redistribute the load or wait for the scale master to clear you." "Are you kidding me?" the driver shouted, the distortion in the headset spiking. "It's 10 degrees out here. I'm not shifting pallets in a blizzard because you're too scared to push a button." "I'm following protocol," Jason said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Do you want me to patch you through to the regional manager? He's asleep, but I can wake him." There was a silence on the other end, a heavy, angry silence. "Whatever," the driver spat. "Useless desk jockey." The line clicked dead. Useless desk jockey. Jason leaned back in his squeaky, ergonomic nightmare of a chair. He closed his eyes. 2 years ago, he would have fired that driver. He would have liquidated the trucking company that employed him. He would have ruined the man. Now, he just took the abuse. He absorbed it. It was part of the penance. For the first 6 months in Omaha, Jason had burned with a white-hot rage. He had spent his off hours in his cramped apartment, drinking cheap whiskey and drafting emails to the SEC, to the Department of Justice, to anyone who would listen, detailing the hostile and unethical takeover of his company. He had planned to write a tell-all book. He had planned to launch a rival startup from his garage. But the Vance reach was absolute. When he tried to get a small business loan for a laptop and server space, the local bank manager, a friendly guy named Dave, had turned pale when he ran Jason's social security number. The application was denied instantly. No reason given. Just a quiet suggestion that Jason should stick to steady employment. The blacklist wasn't a list. It was an atmosphere. It was the air he breathed. Elena hadn't just beaten him. She had quarantined him. Jason spun his chair around to face the corner of the booth. A small, dust-caked television was mounted to the wall with duct tape and hope. It was always tuned to Bloomberg Global News, a torture device Jason inflicted on himself to see the world he had been exiled from. The ticker at the bottom of the screen scrolled past. Tech stocks rally, oil prices stabilize. Vance Logistics posts record Q3 earnings. Jason reached for the remote, his hand shaking slightly. He turned the volume up. The screen cut to a live feed from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The bell was ringing, confetti was falling, and there, standing on the balcony, holding the gavel, was Eleanor. She didn't look like the woman he had divorced. She didn't look like the quiet school teacher who liked oversized cardigans and paperback mysteries. She looked like a Valkyrie. She was wearing a white power suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. Her hair, once messy and loose, was pulled back in a sleek architectural bun. But it was her eyes that held Jason captive. They were sharp, clear, unapologetic. The camera cut to an interview on the floor. A breathless reporter shoved a microphone in her face. "Mrs. Vance, the integration of the smart route system has been hailed as the most significant logistics breakthrough of the decade. Analysts are saying you've saved the North American supply chain $2 billion in fuel costs this year alone. How did you do it? How did you see what the tech giants missed?" Jason held his breath. "That's my code," he screamed internally. "That's my algorithm." "Tell them," Elena smiled. It wasn't the shy smile she used to give him when he came home late. It was a shark's smile. "It wasn't about the code," Elena said, her voice smooth, confident, and utterly terrifying. "The technology existed, but it was being managed by people who treated logistics like a video game. They were obsessed with the elegance of the software, not the reality of the road." She looked directly into the camera. For a second, Jason felt the physical sensation of her gaze crossing 1,000 miles of fiber-optic cable to pin him to his chair in Nebraska. "I simply took a powerful tool out of the hands of children," she continued, "and put it into the hands of adults. We stripped away the ego. We focused on the drivers, the routes, the reality. Innovation isn't just about building something new. Sometimes it's about taking something broken and having the strength to fix it." "And your personal life?" the reporter pressed, pivoting to gossip. "There are rumors of a merger, of the romantic kind, with Senator Bradley?" Elena laughed. It was a genuine, happy sound. "I'm very happy, yes. I found a partner who understands that a relationship is a merger of equals. I don't need someone to save me, and I certainly don't need someone to build me. I just need someone to stand beside me." The segment ended. The screen cut to a commercial for erectile dysfunction medication. Jason sat in the silence, the hum of the warehouse refrigerator units vibrating through the floor. She was right. That was the dagger that finally pierced the last of his armor. It wasn't just that she had stolen his company. It was that she was running it better than he ever could. He had built the engine, yes, but he had been driving the car off a cliff because he was too busy looking in the rearview mirror, admiring his own reflection. Elena had taken the wheel and driven it to the moon. He wasn't a victim. He was a footnote, a cautionary tale in a business school textbook. The heavy steel door of the booth banged open, startling him. Rick stomped in, bringing a gust of freezing air and the smell of stale tobacco with him. "Sterling!" Rick barked, slapping a clipboard down on the desk. Jason jumped, nearly knocking over his cold coffee. "Yeah? What is it, Rick?" Unit 89 blew a gasket outside of Lincoln. "Total hydraulic failure. I need you to route a mechanic out there and I need you to reroute his cargo to Unit 112 before the perishable deadline hits. We got frozen steaks in there, Sterling. If they thaw, it's coming out of your paycheck." Jason looked at the clipboard. It was a logistical nightmare. It would require complex rerouting, factor analysis of 3 different trucks, and a manual override of the driver schedules. It was exactly the kind of problem he used to love solving. It was a puzzle. I can do that," Jason stammered. "But the system, it might flag the hours of service for Unit 112. Rick leaned down, his face inches from Jason's. "I don't care what the system flags. You make it work. That's what I pay you 18 or 50 an hour for. You're the computer genius, right? So be a genius, or get out." Rick turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Jason sat alone in the glass box. Outside, the blizzard was intensifying, burying the world in white. He looked at the screen. The cursor blinked at him, waiting for a command. Be a genius, or get out. There was nowhere to go. The snow was too deep. The road was too long. Jason reached out with his cracked, dry hands. He adjusted his headset. He typed in the command to route the mechanic. "Dispatch to Lincoln Repair," he said into the microphone, his voice hollow, devoid of the arrogance that had once defined him. "I have a job for you." He was a cog, a tiny rusted gear in the massive, glittering machine that his wife had built. And as the wind screamed outside, burying him alive in the middle of nowhere, Jason Sterling realized the truest twist of all. He hadn't lost everything. He had simply been put in his place. And this was exactly where he belonged. That brings us to the end of Jason Sterling's story. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes the trophy wife you think you're discarding is actually the one holding the keys to the kingdom. Jason spent his life thinking he was the smartest man in the room, only to realize he was just a guest in a house built by someone else's power. He mistook silence for weakness and kindness for stupidity. And by the time he woke up, he was just an employee in his own legacy. Now I have to ask you, was this justice? Some people might say Elena was too ruthless, that ensuring he could never get another good job was an act of cruelty, not just revenge. Others would say Jason got off easy. He still has a job after all, even if it is in a frozen warehouse. Where do you stand? Let me know in the comments. Type Team Elena if you think she did what had to be done to protect her family's legacy. Or type Team Jason if you think the punishment went too far and he deserved a second chance. I read every comment, so let's get the debate started. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge and corporate karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm show this video to more people. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got an even crazier story coming next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on. You never know who owns the floor.